Bonnie, what would you think is the first thing we have to, I don't know, what's the first thing that needs to happen to start us on that partnership of allyship?
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So I think the big part is like, what does it mean to like
Mm,
to be an ally? Like, what is an ally? Um, and I think like I did a lot of research myself on kind of figuring out how is the best way to talk about, being an ally,
mm,
like like as a trans person, people who are not trans could potentially be allies for me. Or oftentimes I work at trying to be an ally for folks who are not like myself. So maybe folks who are of BIPOC individuals, so people who are of color, people who are differently abled. There are plenty of people in the world, like, and there's different moments in my life when I have a little bit more privilege or power in a particular situation, or I have a different or better experience with something. And so in that sense, that would put me in a position to be an ally. I know sometimes we use the word privilege often, which I know can be a hard word. Stop. Go lay down.
I'm glad I'm not the only one with
Sorry.
extras in the
Yeah, I
office.
don't know what her deal is. So, um, but yeah, so allyship is, I mean, it can be listed a lot of different ways, but basically it's like you have some form of privilege um, that can afford the, yeah, it just, I don't know if I'm trying to think the best way to describe it. Now I'm kind of getting in my head about it.
Well, one of the thoughts I had was that I think the first step for anyone is to choose. We need to choose, okay, I want to be an ally to this person. I want to be in relationship with this person. I want to and I think that's something that you and I have done. We have chosen to not only be in relationship but to be aligned with one another and to be allies to one another. And a lot of people don't choose that and doesn't then
Mhm.
therefore well, we all know the rest of the story.
Yeah, one of the things where I was looking at, they stated an ally is someone who this had a lot more like big words in it that I thought, I think one of the things in talking with allyship or working with different people, language becomes, I think, really important. And
Mhm.
I think that for me, I'm often trying to navigate how best I can speak to you and your audience in a way that could be heard. And so I'm trying to think of how to say this different, but basically, it's just the idea that you might be in a position to where you might be able to help somebody who's different from yourself, or you're in a position to maybe, yeah, you're in a position to help them, right, or assist or go along with them in their journey. Exactly what I think this podcast is all about in a lot of
Yeah,
ways.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, so do you
um,
think allyship could be with like people too? I mean, I
with
feel like
what?
I'm in people that are similar or like or walk in the same journey. Do you think they can be allies also?
Well, I think when we're talking about allyship in this format or in this way, we are specifically talking about um, you have like that there is some sort of difference
Okay.
between us that sets us apart, typically usually socially or in some sort of power dynamic. So I don't think that there's not that space of equal experience in that moment or in that particular relationship. So
Okay.
does that answer your question?
A little bit. Yeah, it does for this platform.
Yeah,
So,
I
but
mean,
yeah.
otherwise we're just like pals or we're buddies or we're friends. Like I think an ally is you have something to bring to the table to help another individual out, right?
Mhm.
So I mean, I feel like there's probably a million different ways you can say it, and I am going to put in the description um, some of the um, some of the resources that I looked at. I looked up, like, I listened to like how to be a trans ally, how to be a ally like for people of color, how to be an ally for people who are differently abled. There's all these sorts of different ways and different opportunities for us to be allies um, in in our work. So even if, like, just because I'm a trans person doesn't mean that I don't get to work at trying to be an ally, because there are plenty of other people that are having a different experience than mine. And there are moments in my life when I maybe have some sort of power or influence that could be beneficial. And so being able to intentionally kind of, you know, use that or leverage that in a way to help my friend or the person
Mhm.
that I'm in allyship with, hopefully have a better experience in some way. So, um, I have a list of yeah, I have a list of a few, and
Okay.
I think it'd be great if I bring them up and we can talk about them too. But the first one is really to listen. Um, that was one thing that was really common in all of these is just to like listen to the people who are a part of that community. So if you're looking to be an LGBTQ ally, then listening to LGBTQ folks and really listening to them. Uh, oftentimes, I think there are moments when people may share with us their experience, and we might feel like they're not sharing it in a way that's, I don't know, suitable or comfortable for us.
Mhm.
Um, and we sometimes feel like we need to tell them that or whatever. And I think what we really need to be able to do is just listen. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes that's a huge thing. If somebody's willing to talk with you about that or share that with you, I think it's really important just to be able to hold that space with that individual.
I think listening is a hard thing for a lot of people, myself included, and I think we also have to, um, limit ourselves to wanting to respond by trying to fix their problem or trying to out-problem their problem or
Right.
problem their situation. Because I run into that a lot, even just in regular conversation. I feel like people don't hear me because they're too busy trying to tell me how much more serious their situation is or how much more fun their situation is or how I should just do this or that and just be done with it rather than listening to what I have to say. So I think
Hmm.
that's a good part of listening is our posture and to be still and only speak when the opportunity is right.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think, listening, there's lots of, I think it's kind of, it seems like kind of easy, simple. But
But
like
it's
you say,
not.
it can be difficult to
Yeah.
sometimes, we can like kind of interrupt because we're either excited or we're hearing something new. I think oftentimes it can come off as like we know better or we know this.
Mhm,
And then we
mhm.
kind of almost talk over or take it away from that person.
Yeah,
Uh, they're,
I'm
they're,
guilty of that sometimes, so I try to be real conscious of that.
yeah. And I think that you've also modeled it well on this show. Oftentimes, when we've talked about things that might be new or initially you might not like quite get it or you want to talk, you know what I mean? And I've seen you plenty of times just kind of like
Yeah,
kick
yeah,
back and listen and then kind of think about it a little bit more before talking about it or whatever. Um,
yeah. I try to, but I think it's a good practice for all of us to just kinda keep that in the forefront of our mind when we're having conversations. So, anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean
Definitely.
to interrupt you, but listening I thought was a good place to start.
Oh, no, you didn't interrupt me at all. Yeah, so I think listening can be really important and it's something it's constant and ever present.
Yes.
The second, and this isn't necessarily in any particular order, but is to get educated.
Mm,
There are, and this is something we talked a lot about on last week's episode on
yeah.
LGBTQ, IA plus kind of conversation about what those identities mean and those sorts of things, which was very brief, but to kind of do some research and some education. And we do live in a time where there is a lot of information out
Mm,
there for us to access, and so we can Google and learn a lot about different communities. And one of the things that about Googling, it can feel a little overwhelming or what information because you can kind of get you know
everything. Yeah, all
everything
kinds of stuff.
and such vastly different perspectives on the same thing. And so I think it's important in kind of discerning what information I guess works is just kind of looking at who is the person telling us um, about these things and ensuring that these individuals are part of the community that we are seeking or working to be an ally for.
Mm,
I think one of the things that's also important in kind of identifying that it's like, okay, I want to be a advocate to the LGBTQ community, you can very easily just go to, let's say, white LGBTQ folks and ask them, or listen to their videos and those sorts of things. But there's something more to be learned potentially from folks who, from a person of color who is talking about allyship, or somebody who is, again, different from kind of your experience in different ways. So I think those are things to often kind of think about, is like intersectionality. There are often many things that are happening all at once. And so kind of keeping that in mind. So like when I was looking at allyship videos and preparing to talk about this, I was really looking at who's speaking, like who's
Mm,
the one. And I listened to like um, a cis Black woman talk about allyship that was kind of centered around race, but she also spoke to the idea that, that of her space of privilege as being cisgendered, she's not, part of the LGBTQ community. So that's where she can, that's where she can potentially be an ally. And so that's kind of what does that all make sense?
yeah, it all made sense.
Awesome. um,
It can be
the other,
overwhelming though, just an FYI, because, if I'm thinking like in our relationship, so, um, definitely wanna be an ally for you,
mhm,
and I wanna be an ally for anyone who, you would want to engage with.
right, right.
This may or may not be something that I pursue, and, who knows what tomorrow holds. So to think, okay, well, just being understanding how to be an ally to you isn't enough. I have to be an ally to other other types of LGBTQ people, and I'm like,
Mhm,
okay, so that's for me is a little overwhelming, but I think here is a good place for me to start, right? And then
mhm.
come on those other when those avenues present themselves.
Definitely.
So, because for me, until you said, I would have put everybody under the same banner. So that's
Mhm,
a good note I thought that you had to consider all the other perspectives involved. So
mhm,
I
yeah.
appreciate that.
Good morning, Charlie. Thanks for joining us this morning and saying hello in the comments.
Good
If
morning,
you are
Charlie.
watching us live, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. So feel free to chime in with questions, comments, thoughts, that sort of thing. And just to speak more on the get educated part as well, too, is like it can be kind of burdens. Like so, to just go to like one person, or to like you and I are in relationship with one another, and so I think
Right.
it can feel really easy just to come to me and ask me,
You're
"What's
right. It
this
is.
mean? What does that mean?" Or like whatever. But that can be a lot. That can take a lot of energy from me, or kind of burden me to do that all the time. So there's that personal burden of like feeling like I'm having to speak for this large community that I
Mm,
barely know my own experience for. So there's kind of that overwhelming, and sometimes like I'm just living my life, and maybe I had a hard day being trans because somebody called me some horrible name, or I was struggling with, like there, you don't know what's going on in my life, and so sometimes to like take the moment to talk about something like that can be difficult. So I think it's important to not burden like the people that we are working to be allies with, and so getting educated is really really important
all right. That's awesome.
in that aspect too. I don't. Sorry that I'm
It's all
dog
good.
sitting, and
Once in a
she's
while, I can see
deciding to
her
be
little
really
tail
verbal.
behind you.
There's a lot of activity because it's time for school in the morning.
Ah,
But
it's all good.
yeah, I might try to let her out again, but I think she's gonna be wild. Can you hold the conversation for a second?
Well, give me another topic first. You
Well,
said
can you?
education.
Yeah, so we talked about like getting educated. Other aspect is getting involved. I mean,
Ah, okay.
ha yeah.
So,
So
so
how are
yes, involvement. Involvement has a lot of facets, I think, that we all need to consider because as much as we want to be an ally for someone, we need to be aware also of our own comfortability and our own, um, I don't want to get in over my head and cause more harm than good. So to come in and try to be an ally for someone in a space that would be out of my comfort zone may not be very helpful. So just to be aware of that, but to come alongside someone and to the point where you're both comfortable, I think is a good space to be in. Education can take you so far. A lot of that has to come with vulnerability, but I think having that comfort zone is helpful. So I think there is a space for that, for our individual
For
comfort
sure. I
zone.
did not hear
I know you didn't. I know. I was
I
talking
did not
about
hear what you said, but
being my best ally. I need to stay in a space that I'm comfortable in. Because if we're both
mhm.
feeling that vulnerability or that outsidedness, then I could potentially do more harm than good.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I was talking.
Yeah, I mean, and part of that I think is managing that probably not always
Yeah,
with us, like with me, right? Like that might be some discomfort or whatever that process or work through not with me. Sometimes I think you and I we have a very unique relationship. Like we're able to kind of like do that. But yeah, I mean, I think part of trying not to burden the other with those sorts of emotions or feelings or whatever can just be a
right.
way again of trying to be an ally with someone. One of
But
the
I still wouldn't want to accept an invitation with you to go someplace where I'm not myself comfortable. That's what I'm talking about. So I
mm,
wouldn't want, because then I would be burdening you, not with just my own discomfort, but uh, for sure that, but we'd both be in this space where we're both like, okay, what are we doing here? What are we, whatever, maybe in that negative space that we shouldn't be in, but we may,
mhm,
because we all have those areas where we're not comfortable. So for me
right.
to be uncomfortable in a situation, I want to go with you where you're confident enough that you can bring me with you and be my ally. I want to go with you or to be bring you in places where I can certainly be your ally and feel confident, because I think if I
Mhm.
don't feel confident in that space, I don't have any influence.
Well, and
So
how do you gain confidence or comfort?
you have to do it in baby steps, I think. Go into some of these spaces where we can learn how to be more comfortable together so that the crowd around us doesn't matter so much, and then use our influence.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other aspect that is like if you like after we listen and we get educated, we educate ourselves outside of those settings. We read about things. I think for me that can make build confidence around me. I think one of the things I didn't bring up too is watch movies and films about us that we have written and act in. You know what I mean? I think for me, I get a lot from that. Even as a trans person, I watched The Good Doctor, and there was a trans kid who was in that show and was one of the patients, and just hearing like there was a grandma and there was
Mm.
parents and there was the medical community, medical folks, and there was all these different experiences and emotions and feelings, and the trans and the young girl as well and her experience as well, and you kind of get a little bit of insight into kind of all the different points of view. So I think oftentimes documentaries or even some TV shows that cover the issue well can be ways to kind of get a little bit more insight too. The reason why I kept asking about like because I think that we should and good morning to you too, Sarah. I wanted to say good morning to you before we get
Good
going.
morning, Sarah.
One of the things, number 7 on the list was to welcome discomfort. So um, I think that, like as allies, we need to be willing to be uncomfortable, because the people that we're being an ally for, they don't get to take time to be comfortable. They have to go through that thing, usually
Hmm.
24/7. So they don't get many places or that much opportunity to be comfortable. In a lot of ways, being comfortable is a privilege. It comes from um, not all folks have that opportunity for a number of different reasons to kind of have that escape, if you will, from that discomfort. So I think it's important to understand discomfort from like safety or and to be mindful of how you are in this space. Are you
Yeah.
so uncomfortable that it's not cute? Then that's probably like a good thing to be like, yeah, no. But if you're going to be a little uncomfortable, maybe you should think about that. And I think you should lean into that a little bit. I mean, I think a lot of growth is really uncomfortable. We've had to lean into a lot of uh, discomfort,
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
will. Wouldn't you say? Or
I would say yes, but I think again there's levels of that. I certainly wouldn't choose a big platform where I'm already uncomfortable to take someone that I know would be uncomfortable in there and try to be their ally. I mean, but I would certainly go to a normal space like a grocery store or a movie theater or a restaurant and for sure be someone's ally. So I think there's some clarification there on what that discomfort looks like.
good
Because
morning, Zara.
I'm not one to throw myself into the uh, den of lions without being prepared. And I certainly wouldn't bring someone with me to try to protect them if I wasn't comfortable being ready myself.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be a good ally if I did that.
Yeah. Um, Good morning, Zara. Yeah, but I think that what that also brings up too is that idea of like platform. Like you're not speaking for, you're not um taking up space potentially that those individuals need to be taking space up in that particular event. It's hard when we're not talking about like a specific like event or activity, but I think it's also really important to be mindful about the space too. Like I remember when I first moved to Chicago, one of the reasons that drew me to Chicago is that I wanted to be in a city where there was more people that were different than me. Because it felt like back home in Idaho, there was people who looked a lot more like I did. And so part of me wanted to go and experience people that were different than myself. And one of the things that I learned, and this was like, it's a very comes from a place of privilege, its own privilege and kind of misguidedness. But like I just thought I could just go and show up in people's space and just be like, "Hi, like I want to, whatever." And I learned real quick that there were some spaces that were not appropriate for me, to just show up in. I think it's important that there are spaces that you know, are sacred or safe for folks, and to be mindful about the spaces that I go into. So I oftentimes now I wait for an invitation. I wait to be invited into a space that might be of full of people of a different experience than my own. But I know for a long time because I wanted to be a better person, or I could understand that like I was having a different experience because I was mostly around white people, that I was having a different, you know what I mean? I could have a different experience with people who are different than me. And so it kind of in some ways, it can come from this good place, but the impact of that is not good, because being on the other side of that can often feel um, harmful. And so that's something that I've stepped on lots of landmines, and I have not been a great ally often.
Mm.
But I think that's the other thing is about allyship that's also on the list, is to learn from our mistakes.
Yeah,
And thankfully, I was gifted enough to have people in my life who were able to um, point that out to me and share that with me, and so that I could have that experience, so that I could recognize and understand how I'm actually impacting a space just by showing up in it, and not necessarily like me personally, but like what I represent because of the way that I look. Like I bring a lot of things with me, and oftentimes, I look like the oppressor. I look like the bad person, if you will, in some people's experience. So I think those are things to be really mindful of
that's a
when
lot of pressure.
it is. But I think like and like I said, like there are certain things that I don't have to worry about, um, given my own experience. And so if I need to be a little bit uncomfortable with it, then like I said, like people don't always get to, avoid being uncomfortable because of their gender or their race, or there are a lot of things that can sometimes separate us from a group. and make us feel vulnerable and or oppress us, and those sorts of things.
I agree with you. Discomfort is good, but I think there's some wisdom that has to go in all this, and putting everyone else's I don't know, um, feeling above my own is okay to a point, but there comes a point where I have to be who I am. Isn't that what we're talking about? We need the freedom to be who we are. And I want to be who I am just as much as someone else wants to be who they are. And, I don't see things the same way that most people see them. So it's a
I
challenge
think
for
that
me sometimes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the biggest thing about being an ally is making it not about you.
I hear that, but when I'm walking into a space, it's obviously they're not on the same page because it's all about them. Because if I come in and they think I'm an oppressor without even knowing my name, that is not the same type of spirit that I'm asked to come in with.
Yeah. I think
So,
it's just I've learned that it's been helpful for me to to have an understanding of what it is that I represent or that I may represent to somebody. I have worked in fields where I've like needed to work with it is it is a lot more challenging to connect with people that are different than yourself, especially in like you just met kind of situation. Like
mhm,
it's really hard to get deep and to get quick fast. So I've always been kind of in the service oriented work, where providing HIV care in a lot of ways, for different groups of people. And I learned very quick you know, um, how I wasn't the best person oftentimes to work in certain settings because of what I represented and what I looked like. And it didn't necessarily mean I couldn't do the work, and it didn't necessarily mean that I didn't still do it, but I had to be really mindful about how the other person might be experiencing me. And are there ways that, and to understand that it might take a little bit more time for them to feel safe or comfortable with me or to be able to trust me. And so I think that's what I mean when I say like trying not to make it all about me. It's like there I was uncomfortable a good portion of my of of often like there was spaces I was in that I was uncomfortable, but I needed to manage that and work through that and in order to continue to really develop relationships that have with people who have different experiences than me. And my life, and I feel like my perception and perspective is so much more richer,
mhm,
because I have been gifted people who have been in relationship with me in so many different ways who are different from myself, but
yeah.
it's often been really uncomfortable, and I've often taken a lot of things personal, and there's still so much I need to learn and come to understand, and that's a lot of why I'm in relationship with you in the way that I am, is to because in a lot of ways um you represent my oppressor. You represent the people who harm me even as early as yesterday. So um and I
I think
that's
that's interesting that we can all be lumped into a category just because I wear the name of Christian, that I'm lumped into this category without someone getting even an opportunity to know me. And I understand the negative. Okay, well, my last engagement with a Christian was thus and so. Um, but there's no space for someone who doesn't fit that model of what they think it is, to make an entrance into their life, then show them any kind of allyship or love or relationship at all. And it's unfortunate. And that's one of the
I
reasons I think that we have come together was for to, I think, overcome some of these ways of thinking that not everyone, just because they have some of the same identity markers, are the same.
Yeah, I just think it's important to kind of keep that in mind if you really want people to have the experience of you that you're wanting to have. I think that's something that to kind of be aware of. Like, and it's important to not like make assumptions either, because not everybody is going to have that experience of you or to make that assumption of you, but it's important to have some sort of cultural humility when it comes to being in relationship with people who are differently cultured from a different culture. Oftentimes one of the things that I have to try not to do is to assume bad intentions,
Yeah.
and because I mean, we might make this look easy, but it hasn't been on my end.
Mm-mm.
I've had a very difficult time trusting you, and I still have this fear in the same way that you do, that something's going to be said or something's going to happen and we're done, and I have to really work hard to remind myself that um, you're not one of those people, and I have to just constantly, and I'm being just very frank with you, like honest with you, because I think
I appreciate that.
is
I
that
can't I
it's
can't work with it if you're not honest.
right. And this isn't anything I haven't ever, I think, shared with you before, but it's been very challenging, and it's caused me to take space and time from you in order to really kind of work through some of that, like what's going on with this for me, like she's not like that, you know. But then there are certain things that are said, or certain, that are kind of triggers, or I have trauma responses because I have spiritual trauma. I experienced some really deep and severe spiritual trauma, and so there are things that can happen and things that can be said that just take me to that place that I have no control over. And
Mm,
it might cause me to like raise my voice, it might cause me to cuss, it might cause me to like um cower in myself, it might cause me to be quiet, it might cause me to leave, and sometimes, how trauma works, sometimes you don't even know why or how. You just
yeah,
know, shit, something's happening. And that can be very exhausting and taxing, and those are some big things, but there also are like a lot of little things that can kind of, like tap on you all day, and those are the things I think that can really exhaust people and causes, they're called microaggressions, and oftentimes they're not intentional, but they're experienced as these aggressions or these attacks or these poking, if you will, or whatever.
mhm,
And that can be very distressing and very difficult for you to be able to clearly communicate what's going on with you, clearly understand what's going on with you, for you to find a place to feel safe in, because you're so vulnerable. Do you know what I mean? Or you're
yeah,
feeling vulnerable all the time. And so, I mean, I think, and that's what we're dealing. That's what we're doing when we're working with folks as an ally. Potentially, they're experiencing that all the time. And
mm,
so, if we're aware of that and we're not able to personal, like we don't personal take that personal, I think we're just going to be much better at being an ally when we can do that. Like
gotcha.
um, I can hear people say things about white people, and I don't have to take that personal. You know
Mhm,
what I mean? Like when I know a lot of white people want to get upset when blah blah blah, and I was like, no, like I don't have to. I can understand where that comes from as much as I can understand, and I also know that I'm I'm doing things different. Like I'm doing the work to try not to continue that uh, cycle or pattern of harm, you know? And that's where I have to know, and I have to work and trust in
yeah,
myself
that's a lot of pressure
in
to take
order
that on.
to, as people are coming at me, telling me da 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 da, and I also still have to remain open, and I have to listen, and I have to continue to educate myself
Right.
on these things, because it's constantly
Do you feel
there.
like that takes away from who you are?
No, it
If you're
makes me so
constant
much better.
if you're constantly on pins and needles or on
Oh, well,
eggshells trying to accommodate whatever experience they're having in this moment, in the middle of you trying to experience whatever you're
that's
experiencing in
not
that
what I'm
moment, I'm
yeah.
thinking, "My gosh, that's a lot of hard work,
No, I'm not
a
on
lot of
pins and needles.
emotional hard work."
So what I'm saying is they're having that experience. I'm not having like I'm not on pins and needles
I
because of
gotcha.
like I'm not tiptoeing. I'm
Okay,
being
okay.
mindful and I'm being aware, but I'm not necessarily like that's a whole nother level of problem. Can you like being on the other
I
end of
can't
that is
imagine.
not pleasant.
I
You
can't
know, like if
imagine.
like being around somebody who's tiptoeing around you, that's not an
Yeah,
authentic experience. That's not
I
a true
know. I know,
experience.
I've experienced that.
So that's not what I'm saying is that
Okay.
is and again, it's something that happens and something that we've gotten better at the more we've spent time with get together, the more we've had other experiences outside of just one another too,
Mhm.
um, to kind of really help us have a more comfortable relationship with one another.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Um, so I think some of the more like I think some of the things that are often brought up, especially around like transness, is misgendering. And I know that there can be a lot of anxiety for folks who are not trans on like using the right pronouns or the right name or not fully understanding those things. And I think the thing that's always been most important for me is to know that like the person like sees me as a trans person, like they're okay with the fact that I'm trans and I know that. And so then if they misgender me or whatever, like that's going to happen. I've misgendered myself. You know, I've been on camera and I've misgendered myself, you know, because where there's programming in us, right? There's programming in us. If we've had relationships with someone, it's so easy, especially when we're comfortable, for us just to kick back into that mode that we've always been in. And so we often have to like put it in the forefront in order to
Mm.
like, to be good at it. So, I mean, so I think if you do make a mistake, you just acknowledge it, quick, fix it quick, and then kind of move on. Don't try not to make a big deal of it, especially if you're like in a public setting
Yeah.
like with a group of people, you might say you might maybe use my old name or maybe you misgendered me. You could say, "I'm sorry, Bonnie," and like not make a big deal of it. And then if you were concerned that I was hurt by that or you were feeling some sort of way, you could check in with me when it's just like the two of us. Um, but I think yeah, so that's something that I think would be important is not to make it bigger than it needs to be because then it becomes
Mhm.
about you and not about that person. But I think most trans people are pretty understanding if they know that you support them, right? I
Yeah.
know I have a harder time or I even had a harder time with you when I didn't really believe you were okay with me. You know what I mean? Like we went through that for a while. And in the beginning I took it personal. I was like, maybe she really doesn't support me, you know? And so it took me a little while to trust that if that happens, it's not because you don't love me or you think I'm a sinner or you think I'm going to hell or and you love me anyway, you know?
Right,
It's
right.
just like that's how your brain works. And you're working on changing it. And now it's very rarely a thing anymore
Right.
than what it used to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah. Um and Rohina is giving thumbs up and very good. Good morning to you as well, or good evening, yes, wherever you are
Morning.
at. Folks that yeah, I mean, even just in like yeah, it's a different time everywhere,
It is, it
whether
is.
you're watching live or you're listening to this later on. Um, thanks for the compliment on my earring. So not to get too off base, we're actually like right around like the 45-minute mark.
Oh,
So in
wow.
some
Did we
ways,
even
time
get through our whole list?
well, I think the other thing that I just wanted to I mean, there are lots of other things we can do.
Yeah,
One
yeah.
of the things that I think that's helpful, especially when it comes to pronouns, is that when I'm not with you, you call me still by Bonnie and she pronouns. And I know
Mhm.
that you do that, but I think those are ways that you can advocate for a person's identity, like when they're not in the room, you know? So I think those are other ways to not only practice, but also then to to speak up for people, and and I think if you have a relationship with the people, right? Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's like the big thing. If you're in a work environment, it's still important that you use the person's pronouns and names always, um, always. And I know that sometimes it can be difficult when you have life or history with someone prior to their transition, like you and I do. And
Mhm.
I'll often sometimes when I'm going to talk about a past experience, sometimes it's hard for me to feel like, oh, and Bonnie did this or whatever, and it was like, but it's like so like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
understand that because it can be a little bit for me as well. But I think it's just about, like continuing to, yeah, just continuing to kind of like, go through that process. Some of the other things um, is to stay engaged with the person and stay
Mhm.
engaged with the education and the involvement. Um, the show up, I think that can be a big thing is showing up for the individuals, whether it's showing up for important life events for them or it's showing up at the ballot, it's showing up at a rally. I went to a trans rally yesterday here in Idaho because they passed a law in the House. It did get stopped in the Senate, thankfully, to make it illegal to be trans and a youth in the state of Idaho.
Mm.
And doctors and parents of trans youth could be sentenced and put in jail for up to life in prison if they, you know, had a trans kid. Um, and that they also weren't allowed to take their child into another state either for healthcare. And so, um, and I went to a rally and it was mostly, people like myself, where are the allies?
Mm.
Where, and so I think those are ways that we can kind of show up too when we're voting against, I know when there's anti-trans bills in that are coming up to law or those sorts of things. So it can be politically, but it also could just be showing up in people's lives
Right.
with things that are important to them. Checking in on folks when there's lots of things happening in the news.
Mhm.
I remember when the Pulse shooting happened in Orlando, and that happened in Florida, and I didn't know anybody, but I know as a LGBTQ person, I felt really vulnerable and very hurt. Like I was impacted by that. And I remember feeling a little like, why didn't my mom call and check in on me? So I mean, I
Yeah.
think there are ways that like allies, we can kind of be thinking of that sort of stuff. And some of us would like to be checked in on, others of us wouldn't. But I think those are the things of just kind of really being present and mindful and aware as a spiritual person,
Yeah. Yeah.
praying about it, just discerning, all that sort of stuff like that. Some of the other things you could do is as if you're in a position to donate or volunteer, those are also great ways to contribute um, to communities that are different than yourself and or, potentially learn from them if it's appropriate. Um, do you have any other questions about?
No, I don't think so. I thought we had a pretty full conversation about the topics that we hit. So yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be challenging talking about allyship. Um, because it can go in so many different ways and there's definitely a lot of like um nuance, if you will. Um
I think that falls into the expectation. What do people expect allyship for themselves to look like from the people around them? Because we want to be careful not to put expectations on people when they're also dealing with their own discomforts. And I think sometimes that's the case. Well, I expected this or that from you to show that you're my ally, and I don't think that's a fair position either. I think allyship is something that we move forward in as we desire to learn more about other people or to be a part of people's lives, and then we give and continue to give, and to a place of vulnerability, I think, to a point, so that we can become an ally for someone. So there's just so many sides of the coin on all these things, and the more we think about it, we'll find probably 10 more sides of the coin. But yeah, I think we've had a good full conversation. Um, hit a lot
yeah,
of
and I
points.
yeah, I would just challenge you a little bit on that. Like I think that like and it just like expecting other people, like, I don't know, I think there's a difference between, like, I think if you're wanting to do the work to be an ally, then I think you have to be willing to be on the other end of that, and to like not expect more from somebody than what they can give. Um, and especially when we're talking about allyship, and to
Mhm.
me, ally is an action. You are choosing to
Yep,
do this.
I agree.
So I think that's something, I don't know. I think sometimes we have to, I think to expect, sometimes I feel like it's really easy for, and I won't put this on you, for
No.
me to put my feelings or my discomfort or whatever first. And I really have to like examine that and look at that for myself to really see, is it discomfort? Um is it unhealthy? Is it toxic? Those are
Mhm.
different things. And so that's the only thing that kind of came to mind when
Yeah.
in saying that. It's almost like saying, "Oh, well, you can tell me that, but don't raise your voice when you say to me, or you should use these words because it would be heard better." I think as a
Yeah.
person who's not part of that community, I think it's important for us not to tell them that. However, it might be helpful for us to think about that when we're
Well,
working with other folks too.
I agree. I just don't think that it's right for us to put expectations on other people who have said, "You know what? I wanna become an ally. I wanna move towards this direction," and then have an expectation of what that looks like for them. I don't think that's right. That wouldn't be right for me to put that on you. It wouldn't be right for you to put that on me. We want to be allies. We're choosing to be in relationship together and to love one another. For me to expect a certain level of anything from you that you maybe didn't want to give or maybe even didn't consider giving, I think is inappropriate. That doesn't mean you're not my ally. Do you know what I'm saying? The same thing for you. Now, if we can talk through some things and we've made some decisions together, this is the things that we're going to be doing for one another. And then some things just come automatically, like holding space for one another, just because of the relationship that we have. But I think we need to be real careful that okay, you've decided to be my ally, so because you're my ally, I need you to be doing this, 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 and this. I don't think that's reasonable. Does that make sense? Not that you would ever do that, because 'cause you've never done that to me. I'm just saying I just think that's something that we need to consider when we're talking to people about being an ally or having someone that they could recognize as their ally, that doesn't come with, things that we expect of them or guidelines that we expect them to follow to be our ally.
I Yeah, I
Yeah.
would
You
just
think you're
think
tracking?
I would just think on that some more.
Okay.
I will
So it's
too.
okay for me to put expectations on you to be my ally?
I think it's probably, yeah, I mean, I need to trust that if you say that if I do these things that I'm being an ally than you, then that's important to me. Like if
It
you're
is
telling
important.
me how I can be an ally to you, I that's what I want to do. So so I
But
don't
what if
think
it puts you in a space where it compromises who you are?
I don't yeah, maybe it depends on the situation, but maybe I need to
And just some things to just
take one for the team. Maybe
so
I
yeah,
need to take
so
one for the team or figure out how I can, and really ask myself, am I really willing to be an ally?
yeah, I think that's some good things to consider.
Yeah. Awesome. Well,
Sorry, did we go over? Because I know we kind of did a
no,
side note
yeah,
after you
but as
said,
long
"Oh,
as
we're
we're
kind of
as
done."
long as we're less than an hour, we don't
Okay.
have to
I'm
edit
sorry,
right away. So
I
no,
didn't
that's
mean to take
okay.
us down a whole 'nother
It's
journey, but I don't know, just random thoughts. I think that if we're not honest with one another and share our thoughts with one another, then it leaves us in
mhm,
deficit, and I don't wanna do that because I
right.
love you.
Hmm. Yes. And yeah, yes.
Anyway,
We could talk about this for
yep,
like
we could.
forever. And I'm sure it'll come up plenty of times in the future. But Thanks, everyone, for joining us this evening, this morning, wherever you're coming in contact with us. We are glad you are here. We'd love to hear from you about your thoughts on allyship and how one could be an ally. If you have any feedback on our conversation today, also I'll put some links in the description from some of the things that I checked out that you might be good places to check out from as well. I wanted to give a shout out to Bob Kaiser, who is a new Patreon for a queer
Yay.
chaplain, and I also wanted to thank our other Patreon members, Casey, Mark, Todd, Jonathan, Gabriel, Jeffrey, Violet, and Joey. Thank you all for your monthly contributions to Queer Chaplain Productions, to put on, to do Splintered Grace, as well as a number of other things. So join us next week. We will be here same time. With the time change and everything else, it's 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time,
Yeah.
9 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Central Time, and 11 a.m. Eastern Time if you want to join us live on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch, either on our personal socials or at A Queer Chaplain. All right. Do you want to say goodbye?
Have a great week. We'll see you.
All right.
Can't figure out which way we're going. See you later.
All right. Splintered Grace Podcast is brought to you by A Queer Chaplain. Follow us on all of our social media, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at A Queer Chaplain. Listen to us wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe, comment, like, and share. Feel free to tip us at Venmo, Bonnie Violet, and support monthly on Patreon. The song is original by Steven Sandnoff, The Chasm Between Us. Rest in peace, Steven.